So I am going to talk to you today. I'm actually going to give you a talk that I have now given twice in the last month because I gave a version of it to our teachers at in-service and then a version of it to your high schoolers on retreat. And this talk, I hope, gives, feel free, a vision for the overarching principle behind why we educate the way we do. And it's very weird. Not the talk. I think the talk is normal, but it may be a little surprising to some of you. I also wanted to say I focus a great deal on our belief in God and why that influences and how that influences our educational theory. But when I was thinking about it last night, I was thinking, I don't actually think you have to believe in God to believe that this is still really important. You would have to believe that the world is worth knowing about. And you would have to believe that under things is goodness. And I don't know if you can believe that without believing in God, but if you can, I think you would still be on board with the principle. So I just wanted to kind of start there so you could be thinking about that as we go along. When I started my first school program here in Houston 9 years ago, Socorro's kids were some of my very first students. I spent a lot of time driving around to various groups and conventions, schools, and just info nights of families to talk about my program and why families should send their kids to what we were about to start instead of whatever school they were already going to. Once it got started, I spent a lot of time talking to the groups of teenagers who had got signed up, often against their will, about why they should bother to do all the insane amounts of reading, writing, and talking that was now a part of their life. The talk in both places was pretty much the same. You see, I had become convinced of something when I lived in California and working at a university. It was something that I had started to realize in high school, became very clear to me in college, and felt more and more important as I started to get to know more and more schools. And it was this. We were doing school wrong. From start to finish, we were doing it wrong. We had taken the means, the practices, the disciplines, the areas of focus, and had made them what they never were supposed to be, the end, the goal, the why we did what we did. We don't learn algebra or read Shakespeare to be good at algebra and knowledgeable about Shakespeare. We do it for a much, much more important reason, one that if we can just remember it, can transform our lives and our kids' lives. This summer, among the busyness of preparing for the year, I was gifted a couple of opportunities to remember why we do what we do. For a school administrator, oftentimes summer can be the busiest time because we have so many things, especially because we're constantly having construction for some reason. So constantly new surprises happening. But John and Megan Muller and I got to go to a classical education conference this summer to promote our college. I have been in the world of classical education since I myself was a student in it and when I was 14. I have worked in it for 12 years. So when I go to these conferences, I don't really hear new things, and I don't really expect to. In fact, I can often go feeling a little too good for it. But there were some things that really stood out to me this time. I think particularly because it had been quite a few years since I had been to a conference at all, like many of us, and even longer since I had been there without like a baby with me distracting me. So I got to spend time in sessions that I picked out for my own enrichment and enjoyment. One of the first sessions I went to was a seminar on teaching Shakespeare that turned out to be a workshop format in which many of the participants, all adults, either parents or teachers, got to be the student and got to play, got to try out acting Shakespeare badly. That was the task. And I sat and I watched people play these roles, try out goofy instructions, and then later discuss King Lear, which was the play we were acting so poorly, and his evil daughter Goneril. And to be honest, at first I kept thinking I should just leave the seminar and go check my email. I probably had more important things to do, like checking email, than sitting here and thinking about Shakespeare. But thankfully, a speaker that later in the day, I was just really annoyed with the whole thesis of his presentation, was like mad at him. But he reminded me of something when he said, what are you doing in your day, and what are your students doing in their day that is more important than the contemplation of the good? Hold on to that for a second. What are you doing in your day that is more important than thinking about, being with, dwelling with that which is good? The second catch I was given this summer came just a few weeks ago when I, as a good St. Constantine school parent, read all of my children's syllabi before the start of the year. I'm sure you all did that too. Thank you. Thank you. I have one kid in school, and he's 4, so I know it's not too hard. But Kana would be reading for weeks. You're just like reading and reading. Yeah. My 4-year-old son is in the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd class, and I nearly started to cry at the beauty in this syllabus. I want to read you a portion of the Catechesis syllabus describing the start of their class time. This is a class that's for 3- and 4-year-olds. Having begun our year, we turn to using calming works like scooping beans, washing tables, and polishing the various items in the atrium. The goal of this work is to help the child be at peace in silence so that they can begin to listen for the voice of God. Doesn't that just hit your heart in all the right places? We have provided, no thanks to me, I didn't know much about Catechesis of this Good Shepherd, but we have provided a place for our 3- and 4-year-olds to listen carefully and quietly and peacefully to the best of their ability. It's not always so careful and quiet, but listen for the voice of God. And we want to do that for every one of our students, every day. And we want to do it for you. Why? Because school isn't about learning math or how to write a great sentence. It is not about the anatomy of a cell or singing in harmony in choir. It includes all of those things, and it should, because they're excellent means for what we're trying to accomplish. But it is not about them. It is about coming to a knowledge of and a lived experience of God through the good, the true, and the beautiful. It is about coming to a knowledge of God through the lived experience of the good and the true and the beautiful. That's what school subjects are. That's what they're meant to be. We study algebra because it's awesome. Not because we're all going to be engineers. My dad was an engineer, so whenever I complained that algebra was useless, he was like, literally use it every day. You can't get away with that from me. I was like, useless for me! I will never study it again. But that's not why we do it, right? Like, you don't have to become an engineer for it to be valuable. It's valuable in and of itself because it is good, and because it is true, and because it teaches you things about a world that is awesome. I am hoping to convince you this morning, or at least give you the hint of an idea worth pursuing, that school is about living in the presence of God, and in so doing, becoming really, truly, deep down happy. That's what I tried to persuade our teenagers of this summer, because they're not happy, and they should be. School is about living in the presence of the good, and so becoming happy. And I only care about school because of this. I dedicate most of my waking moments, a good chunk of my time, energy, thoughts, and gray hair to this, because I believe that it is one of the most important tools that we have to come to know the good and be able to experience the good life. Because God has revealed himself in the world around us. And it is the job of a school to simply show that to its students. To reveal the glory of God in all the many places it resides, so that your kids can get the inexpressible honor of bearing witness to it, ever more completely as they themselves grow. I basically can't give a talk without quoting my favorite poet. My friend Peter always says, just the best poet, Gerard Manley Hopkins. So I might as well do it now. If you've been around St. Constantine for any length of time, you probably all know this poem by now because you would have heard me or Mr. Muller or Mrs. Muller or Mr. Yee quote it at length every chance we get. He famously says in his poem, God's Grandeur, "The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed." Think of these two images. They're so awesome. If you shake metal, a foil in his language, it flashes light because it can't help it. That's just what it does. It doesn't generate the light, it just reflects it off of it. It flames out. And what happens when you smush something filled with oil? Your kids know, right? They do this all the time. Like an olive or some wonderful food that you've carefully marinated. The oil sits and stays with the thing until it becomes too much and it oozes out, probably staining their clothes. It can't help it. The oily goodness gathers to a greatness and it must move. This is the world. A world that can't help but show the greatness of God. And this is what our education is supposed to be showing us all the time. Every book, every formula, every song. This idea is nothing new. That's what is the first thing one of the first things that we say about God in prayers every morning at school. I believe in God the Father, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. The very first attribute of God that the Creed lists is him as Father and Maker, as the author of all things visible and invisible. Why start there? There's many other important attributes of God that the Creed is going to go on to list. You start there because that's the primary way in which God is located in relation to us. He is our maker. We are embodied people living in a real world that he made. He is the maker of all the things that we interact with every single day. Don't you see what this means for your student? It means that their job is to be seeking out all the time God as maker. When we study Euclid or Aristotle, this is what we're getting at. When Euclid says, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Or the whole is greater than the part. He's not playing games. He's not tricking or figuring something out that no one knew. He's just saying something true about the universe. He is saying something true, and whenever something true is said, as St. Justin Martyr declared in the first century of the church, it is a reflection of God. I disagree with Ivan Feodorovich in the Brothers Karamazov. Ivan is a brother who, not in Dostoevsky's novel of the three brothers, there's the passionate oldest brother, there's Ivan, the philosopher, the maybe atheist, but he's not actually an atheist. He believes in God, he just hates him. And then there's the monk brother, Alyosha. I disagree with Ivan when he says that he cannot understand God because he, Ivan, has a Euclidean mind, a logical mind. His implication is that the mind of God is so ununderstandable, beyond comprehension, and of course in some ways that is true, but not in the way that Ivan means it. Ivan means that God is absurd and ununderstandable, and we have this logical mind, and so we cannot interact. But we have a Euclidean mind because that's what God has. And that's what God made. We are a bunch of Euclidean minds that in most places are no longer studying Euclid. That's going to be a problem for us. We need Euclid because he is revealing vital truth about the way the world is. And if we lose that, if we never get a chance to study him. This is true in every area we study. A good classical Christian education is one that seeks to show the students the best that man has to offer, because it is reflective of a varied way in which man has discovered the glory of God. Euclid did it through points and lines and angles. Hopkins did it through poetry. Socrates did it through questions. If there was one thing I would like to communicate effectively to our students and to you, their parents, I guess, it would be the honor, the glory, the immense privilege of getting to study what we study. This summer, freshmen in high school, as many of you know because you struggled with it with them, got to sit around and read one of the greatest poems, the Iliad, to ever be put to page and tongue. The seniors just bathed in 1,200 pages of one of the great minds of his generation, Leo Tolstoy, as he pondered about war, humanity, love, and purpose in his War and Peace. As all of our students read through their assignments, they got to hear directly from some of the greatest minds of the past wrestle with ideas of soul, of beauty, of evil, of love and hate, peace and war, purpose, action, inaction, immortality, holiness, God himself. And now they get to come to school and talk about it with their friends. How great is that for school? All the high schoolers were like, yeah. I want students walking through these doors to be smacked in the face every single day with the glory of their beautiful lives. They should be overwhelmed with the sheer gorgeousness of getting to feed some sheep, or do burpees with Mr. Yee, or solve a math problem, or wrestle with why Aquinas thinks theology is a science. This is, by the way, one of the reasons that at St. Constantine we tend not to stick Bible lessons on top of the rest of the lessons, or have a separate theology class. It's because we believe that for our purposes as an Orthodox Christian school, every single subject you are already experiencing the riches of God. When you study the structure of the cell, God's glory is flaming out. When you get that harmony in choir just right and hear the beauty of voices singing together, it is oozing with greatness. This is an area where my own tradition as an evangelical Protestant is a little anemic. In fact, it's kind of atrophied to death. We think if there's not a scripture reference on top of the end, it's not Christian. And this is nonsense! When the new batch of college students moved in for the summer, we took them to St. Joseph Orthodox Church for their first Sunday. And Father Joseph, after the service, gave us a tour of the iconography all around the church. The entire interior of the church is painted. It's incredibly beautiful with saints and Bible images and the life of Christ. Not being a regular there, I didn't know much of what he was telling us, and I was particularly struck by something I had never noticed before. He pointed out that the left-hand side of their church is dedicated almost exclusively to women saints. And that's traditional. And as I looked over at the left of the building, I noticed woman after woman who had found sainthood and found holiness in incredibly different lives. Whether it was Mary of Egypt, a prostitute who fled her life and wandered in the desert, or St. Elizabeth, the new martyr, who our House of St. Elizabeth is named after, who lived the life of a Romanov duchess and then gave it up to be a nun after her husband was killed by the Bolsheviks. These women found God in their lives, their varied, different lives, in different countries and at different times. I don't know how much scripture Mary of Egypt ever had access to, because her story is one of walking into a church and then running away and fleeing to the desert. She may not have had much scripture, but she had the desert, she had the animals, and she had the skies. In Psalm 19, David says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge." Without speech or language, without sound to be heard, their voice has gone out into all of the world. Their words to the ends of the earth. The skies pour forth speech. How beautiful is that image? Night after night, they reveal knowledge. They reveal knowledge. They do it themselves. So what does it mean for a science class in biology and chemistry, physics, or our capstone, astronomy? The very skies, the very organisms, forces, and chemicals we study are telling us about the glory of God. We just have to notice. I've always loved, but also been a little skeptical of William Wordsworth, who is a favorite poet of mine, in his Tables Turned, when he says, "Books, 'tis a dull and endless strife. Come hear the woodland linnet. How sweet his music on my life, there's more of wisdom in it. And hark how blithe the throstle sings, he too is no mean preacher. Come forth into the light of things, let nature be your teacher." Now, I don't believe that books are a dull and endless strife. I teach great books here, and especially the books we read are wonderful, but Wordsworth is offering us a corrective. I think especially for schools, especially for teachers and students. It's easy to be bored of a book, especially a bad book, but it's very hard to not be fascinated by the nature of things, especially if you've been taught to see. Because maybe Wordsworth isn't that different from the psalmist here. There is real wisdom in beauty. David isn't saying in the Psalms, forgo all scripture, teaching, tradition, and revelation, when he says, look to the skies. But he is saying, look to the skies. They declare things. How? At least in part, it has to be through beauty. I think the stars are especially good at showing us order as well. I know Mr. Harris, Mr. Nickel, and Mr. Muller, our astronomy teachers, probably have lots more ideas about what the skies have to say. A student's job is simply to look, to dig, to push, to see the things that are already there, the things that are bursting in front of us, trying to get their attention. I think Hopkins, again, in a different poem, gives us a beautiful example when he says, "Glory be to God for dappled things." This poem always makes me cry. "Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color like a brindled cow. All things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is feckled, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle, dim, he fathers forth, whose beauty is past change. Praise him." What is he pointing to here? What is the weirdness that he sees? The God who is past change, who changes not, creates dappled things, creates things that go fast and slow, that change colors, that have two colors, that mess up, that get corrupted. And why is this an important observation? Because we are dappled things. We are good and bad. We are changing and malleable. I am fickle, freckled, who knows how. On the very first page of his Institutes, John Calvin begins with a passage that I always think should be a hallmark of classical education and of spiritual formation, but no one ever seems to think so. I think because Calvin is so grumpy all the time that people just ignore him. But he opens his book by saying, "Our wisdom, insofar as it ought to be deemed true and solid wisdom, consists almost entirely of two parts, the knowledge of God and of ourselves. But as these are connected together by many ties, it is not easy to determine which of the two precedes and gives birth to the other. For in the first place, no man can survey himself without forthwith turning his thoughts towards God, in whom he lives and moves. Because it is perfectly obvious that the endowments which we possess could not possibly be from ourselves alone. Nay, that our very being is nothing else than subsistence in God. In the second place, those blessings which unceasingly distill to us from heaven are like streams conducting us to a fountain. Then Calvin gets really Calvin-y for a second about how terrible we are, and then concludes with one of my favorite lines of practical theology. Every person, therefore, on coming to the knowledge of himself, is not only urged to seek God, but is led by the hand to find him. This is what education should do. This is the point. We look at the world around us, we dig into it, we learn about it in its glory and its goodness, in its fallenness and its brokenness, because that part too is a teacher. And it teaches us about ourselves and about God. This is the beginning of wisdom. The beginning of being able to properly locate yourself in the world around you, in your relationship with others, and to God. This is the kind of education that elite leaders, generations of rich people, have been getting forever. What would you study if you never had to worry about making a living? But someone might ask you to lead the free world someday. You study great books. You study history and music and language and advanced mathematics. The good stuff, the real stuff, the stuff that if you attend to it well will make you wise. This is what people have always taught those that we thought would be our leaders. And I think we're passionate at St. Constantine that this is for everyone. That there should be no distinction between poor kids and rich kids in this area. Everyone deserves an education that is rooted in revealing the goodness of God and in pursuing wisdom for its own sake. And we're very fortunate to live in the time and the place that we do. Practical education, as far as job training goes, it doesn't work. The jobs that your kids are going to get in 10, 15, 20 years do not exist yet. We don't know about them. If you had tried to train to be a leader of a company today, 20 years ago, you would have trained in all the wrong things. So instead, train to be wise. Train to listen well. Train to understand the world and people as it is. And you'll get the job you need too. Another thing that's increasingly true is that real practical education that you do need for jobs like being a physician or an engineer is going to come in grad school, not in high school. So let's be a generalist, right? Until we need to specialize. And this is where happiness comes in, because that's what I said this was about. There's a phrase that gets thrown around in classical education, especially the classical Christian world all the time. That is, we should be teaching from a place of rest. I have never known what this meant, but I am sure I have never done it. In fact, I have resented deeply those who talk about it because I am too busy, I am too important, and they must be a little lazy, and that's why they're so well rested. I think as parents, you probably feel similarly. If someone told you to parent from a place of rest, you're like, oh, that would be great. That sounds wonderful. Please show me how to do that. The school year can feel like this breakneck pace. Your lives are incredibly full. And there's probably a lot of rushing from place to place, finishing things at the last minute, stuffing up backpacks full of whatever is in the cupboard. That's what I did this morning. I was like, oh my gosh, here's a sandwich, chocolate sandwich. I don't know. You're racing to the car. The other day we showed up to school and realized my 2-year-old didn't have any shoes. I was like, I guess you're wearing galoshes. Glad theirs are here. So maybe everything starts to feel a little late, behind, stressed out, inadequate, stupid, unable. I thought about the idea of teaching and of living in a place of rest a lot this summer, especially when sitting and watching a bunch of educators delight in acting Shakespeare poorly, or thinking about my 4-year-old scooping beans so as to hear the voice of God. Because who am I to think that my busyness is what brings things to the table? That my rushing will produce better fruit than the rest, contemplation, and peace that God offers us all the time? What am I missing? Because surely I am missing a great deal if I am too busy, too hassled, too distracted, or just too negligent to notice the beauty of the woodland linnet, or the glory of a Socratic question, or an excellent mathematical solution. As I mentioned, a couple Sundays ago, we brought these 20 college students to St. Joseph, and it was the first time I had been to St. Joseph on a Sunday morning. And I can't tell you how much I appreciated the slow beauty of the service. Now, I was chasing 2 toddlers around for a lot of it, so it wasn't as slow as it could have been. But even with that distraction, children, the same distraction that we all have every day at school and in our homes, beauty was waiting to smack me in the face whenever I would look up or listen, smell, or breathe. That's what I want for all of us in this community. I want you to see the work we do here as an invitation to glory in, to dwell in, to bathe in the goodness of God, and to invite your children to do the same. I promise you the teachers are. We are so blessed. I don't think people know what they're missing when they're not living a sacramental, sacrificial Christian life. When they're not studying, thinking, contemplating, resting in the glory of the world and of God. I don't think they know how much joy there is to be found, how much of the deep beauty, the deep magic of the world is right here at their fingertips. If they did, they would be rushing to get here, to do what we get to do every day. And we get to do it every single day if we just slow down enough to let ourselves enjoy it. And I hope you hear that as an invitation. Resting in the glory of God, letting your kids study the things set before them because you believe in the deep of you that what is before them is worth it and is good. That they are worth it, and that your kids' time and heart and effort is all a practice of helping them become more whole, more human, and more happy. If you believed as I do, that your mind could be transformed, your heart healed, and your very self made whole through the goodness of the things of God in the subjects that we study at school, I wonder how different it might look to help kids with homework or to read alongside them. According to just about every study on youth out there right now, young people are more anxious, depressed, and unhappy than they have ever been. And that is really strange. They are more likely to go to college, to be upwardly mobile, to never experience hunger or severe poverty. American teenagers live at peace in a thriving and wealthy nation despite all the noise. And yet they are more unhappy than people their age have ever been. Side note, we're going to talk about this a lot at 3 o'clock. What this tells me is that political peace, extreme wealth, because every single one of us is extremely wealthy in a global and historical standard. Even goals of personal self-fulfillment, like going to college and getting a good job, they don't bring us much happiness in the end. Our kids can do all of these things more easily than anyone before them has ever done it, and they're miserable. If that's true, that means those things are not good enough reasons to spend 20 years of your life in school. So what is? The glory of God and the experience of it, the existence in it, the contemplation of the good in all its many forms. In short, the examined contemplative life, in which you live at rest, in which you read and think and make music, you laugh, you run, you get really covered in sand every day. You glory in the riches of the world. My son came home and was like, I got bit by like 7 ants. And I was like, are you okay? He's like, yeah. Okay, cool. In its many, many forms, even the ant bites, in which you are being you, seeking the good as best you can. There is a passage at the end of The Lord of the Rings that always makes me cry. My husband and I listened to it on the way home from our vacation. We had been listening to it while we drove 7,000 miles, literally 7,000 miles this summer, because we went on vacation on the East Coast, and then a family member had a baby on the West Coast, and we were like, we're just living our car. So we listened to The Lord of the Rings. We were like sobbing, like driving down from Madisonville. Frodo and Sam have been rescued against all odds from the feet of Mount Doom as it self-destructs. They finished their quest and destroyed the One Ring. But all the while that they had been pursuing this quest, they had known that if they were successful, which was highly unlikely to begin with, it would mean their death. They did not see any way for them to both save the world and be rescued themselves. They also believed that their dearest friends and their hero Gandalf were dead. But they were rescued. And Gandalf too had survived. And on seeing him, Samwise Gamgee says, "Is everything sad going to come untrue? Is everything sad going to come untrue?" Do you know that the answer to this question is yes? Not just in the magical world of The Lord of the Rings, but here, in this world. Everything sad, bad, ugly, unmade, unhelpful, hurtful, harmful, evil, and wrong is going to come untrue. Because at the core of the world is goodness. All other things are just passing away. Everything sad is going to come untrue. It is fake, false, temporary, and defeatable. It is all but over. The good is what lasts. The true is what will remain. Because that is what God is, and that is what he has made. The bad, the wrong, the sad is temporary. And so we're going to leave it be. Let's spend our time on the real things, the good stuff, so that we can experience the joy of it. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, that which is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put those childish ways behind me. For now we see only a reflection in a mirror. Then we'll see face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know, even as I am fully known. I've always been struck by that last line. Then I will know as I am fully known. I will know the way God knows me. How is that possible? Heaven, the end of all things, is the place where you will know, even as you are known now. It is where everything sad comes untrue and you see face to face. And I believe that the best we can do now is to live in a way that shows our belief that that is a real country, where the beautiful and the good and the true are evident in all things. You don't have to look for them anymore. And it is our job on this earth to get good at seeing the mirror's reflection. the part of the good that we can see, to the glory of God and the fulfillment of our own hearts and minds and souls. Church does this all the time. And it is my firm conviction that school has to too, if it is worth doing at all. It's too much time to waste on anything else. So this year, I just hope that you'll join us, that you will commit to find the good and to seek it out alongside your children with your whole heart, and just watch them do the same. Thank you.